Crystal Washington, I am so excited. We have actually been stalking you for several months, I think, and trying to get on your calendar so we can have this conversation. So thank you for making time to join our Femme Futurist Society series today.
Well, thank you for having me, Nancy. I'm so excited to be included in a series featuring so many amazing women and to spend time with you, the main amazing woman who started this.
I know, like I say, Emma and I, do you think there was a stroke of genius that we did this just about a year ago? We're about to have our year anniversary on Mother's Day. Oh, wow. And it has saved my soul and brain and all those during this past year when I haven't been able to be out on the road, right? Normally we would have met up at an event or we would have seen each other at something that our curiosity led us to, and we don't get to do that so much this year or this past year. So I think it's going to start opening up again. But it has been great to be able to meet so many inspiring and informed and positive women who are out there shaping the future. So thank you for sharing more about yours. So, the way we always love to start this, Crystal, is tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are. What were you, I know it's really hard to boil that down in 5 minutes or less, but I'm just curious, not so much around the bio, like the actual markers, but what are the things that pivoted you from here to there? And how do you describe what you do now? How do you describe your work?
Okay, so currently I'm a technology strategist and a certified futurist. But the way this shows up, in the world is that I'm a professional speaker, and that's what I do full time. So organizations bring me in to show them how they can use technology to increase profits and productivity. But I use my foresight training and how I develop my programs and trying to kind of sneak that into my presentations to empower the audience. Now, how I got here is a really funny and strange journey. My background is in hospitality with an emphasis in sales and marketing. And so in my early 20s, I worked for hospitality companies. And I remember at one point I was in this position that was kind of this interesting cross between accounting and marketing. And I was making my company tons and tons of money. Excuse me, I have to take a sip of water. I don't know what is going on. 1 second.
No worries.
Sorry about that. It got me.
No worries.
Okay, so I was making this company tons and tons of money in my early 20s. And I went to my boss and I said, hey, there's this thing called social media, which is funny now, but this is before Facebook. I said, there's this thing called social media. And I have a feeling can you imagine if companies use this one day to talk to consumers? Imagine Coca-Cola talking to their customer and having a two-way dialogue. Now, of course, right now, Nancy, we're all duh. But at the time, it wasn't a thing yet.
Oh, honey. I remember actually having just you'll be the person who appreciates this comment the most. I've said this so many times. Part of being a futurist, right, is you explain what's on the horizon and people tell you it's never going to happen. I was told emphatically a CEO will never tweet.
Oh, juicy. So, yes, So, I went to my boss, hey, this is going to be huge. I said, you should give me just a little bit of time to look into this and figure out how our brand can leverage this for our company. And he looked at me, and this was an elder baby boomer gentleman. And he said, look, kid, you're cute, and you make us a bleep load of money. He didn't say bleep, Nancy. He said, stick to what you know. I said, oh. And see, I'm a millennial, so I did something that was very millennial.
Right.
A few months later, I quit my job to start a digital marketing firm because I was like, it's going to be big. Everything in me said it was going to be huge. And so I started with mom and pops first because they're agile. You can get in there and move around and there's not too much bureaucracy. And then as I started getting them results, I started attracting bigger clients. So I had contracts with Google and British Airways. And then here's how I got on the track I'm on now, because everyone's a member of some type of professional organization. And my clients would say, well, Crystal, you and your team do such a good job of explaining what you're doing, not just doing it. So we're informed. Can you speak at XYZ luncheon? And I would just do it for my clients just to be nice until I started getting so many on my calendar. I was like, I can't keep doing this. These aren't billable hours. I didn't know speaking professionally was a thing. So the first organization I said no to when I decided I can't keep doing these, I said, no, I'm so sorry. I just don't have the time. And they said, but we'll pay you. And I said, oh. And then I researched and I found professional speaking, and I said, oh, I'm doing the wrong thing. And so that was how I transitioned into speaking. And now that's what I do full time. So that's.
So you like the speaking folks like this? Actually, part of it was, I mean, you created campaigns, right? You executed programs for clients. You don't miss the strategic or the building part?
No. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I enjoy this more. Because what happens is oftentimes when you're doing the strategic piece, you need someone to come in and open people up to the possibilities. Because there's always those people on the teams that don't want to hear it. They don't like change. They're fighting you, right? And so now I get to be the person that companies bring in. Sometimes they have their own technology initiatives they're rolling out, and they bring me in just because I can get people's minds open. And I won't speak about something I don't believe in. So if a company is initiating something and I'm like, I'm not going to work for them to try to open anyone's minds up to anything if I think it's bad. But it's really cool to be able to be on stage. And my favorite moment is when there are people in the audience that maybe they feel like they don't get technology or they're scared at the pace of change. And seeing the light bulb go off, you kind of see it on their face. You see it in their eyes. And so, like, for me, I don't care if people think I'm smart when I'm speaking. I love when I leave seeing people understand how smart they are. Where they're like, oh, this isn't rocket science. Oh, I can do this. Oh, it's practical. So I love that moment of watching people come to the realization that they can manage this. They're smart enough to do this, and they can use it in ways to be better people, and they don't have to worry about it using them if they're strategic in how they use it.
So how have you managed this past year when you haven't been able to be on the road doing it the same way?
So I'm a little bit of a unicorn. Most of my peers in the speaking space had a very, very, very rough time. But I've been very fortunate in that my business has been, I actually was busier last year than prior years. As conferences moved into digital formats, I'm known for being high energy and interactive. And I had to definitely change the way I deliver messages, because it's very different the way that you deliver information virtually versus in person, especially to get energy up. But no, I've been staying busy doing 2 to 3 virtual programs a week for clients.
But you don't get to see their face. What I'm saying is you don't get to have that same, like, watch the thing happen in their eyes, do you?
Some of them I do. So, for instance, if it's in a meetings format, which I've done for some larger organizations, then you can see their little cameras, right, when they choose to put them on. For the ones where it's in like the webinar format, whatever platform they're using, no, you don't. But I learned early on to get over it, Nancy, because what I realized is that for me to be successful, I had to make it less about me. And that look in their eyes is for me, not them. They're not seeing themselves. And so they can still have those realizations. I had to get over my need for validation, right? And just say, you know what? I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to watch chat. And you can kind of see what's happening with people. And I'm just going to give it my all and just believe that it's working. And it has, right? So it's an adjustment.
Right,
but
for sure.
You have to choose to be of service. And sometimes that means putting your feelings and what your preferences are, in the back seat.
Well, I was going to say partly, there's so many ways I want to go there, but, so then during Donald Trump's presidency, I think we've gotten all a lot more savvy or appreciative of social media and its potential and its peril and its whatever. So is there a different receptivity when you're going to have this conversation now? Like, what is sort of the big thesis of your message? Because it's not so much that social media is here, or that we need to pay attention to it, that it's going to drive your business, right?
Well, I actually don't. Social media is a small piece of what I speak on now.
Okay. I didn't realize that. Okay, cool.
Yeah, over time, it's kind of expanded. Yeah, it's just like if someone goes to my website, most of my videos are on social media, just because for whatever reason, most of the clients that record me happen to be the ones that request those presentations. I actually do more future of technology presentations than anything.
Okay.
So it might be the future of technology for real estate. So what they need to know about blockchain, what they need to know about AI and how it's shifting the way buyers purchase, especially for investment properties. Or those types of things, even for financial advisors. So that's kind of, and social media plays a role in what I talk about, but it's a piece, because what I realized early on is that people were making a mistake, Nancy, of thinking that social media was its own self-contained thing, whereas it's part of an ecosystem. Like, there's no such thing as a phone strategy. Yes, it's an old school phone.
I know, that's so amazing. Look at that.
Now I'm gonna make up for that by showing y'all this. Okay, so You make whatever judgments you want from all of that.
But how often do you use your real phone, or your old phone, your landline phone?
All the time, because it's better call quality. It's more reliable. So for my client calls, I actually prefer to do that because the sound quality is better and it's more reliable than my mobile devices.
Do you have to literally hold it?
Well, I do have a headset I can put on.
Okay, good.
It's very retro. It's very retro. But the clients are always like, your phone call snap, like the quality's so good. We're so used to making adjustments for mobile that when we have a good quality call, it's like, oh, wow, this sounds amazing. Yeah. And mind you, I have really great reception in my house for my mobile devices. It's just that phone sound.
I know. But you're right. We don't have a phone strategy, right? But we do have a mobile strategy, which is actually interesting, right? So we don't have a landline strategy, but we have a mobile strategy.
Right. But social media by itself is like saying, oh, I'm going to employ my phone strategy. No, it's part of a larger strategic, it's part of a larger marketing plan, sales plan. It's a little piece of a big puzzle. So that's why I don't really speak on social media specifically very often anymore, because usually people really need more of an ecosystem. They need a more holistic approach.
So the technology, you think, is poised to create the biggest change in our world in the next 10 years?
Oh, so much. So much. I would say it's probably, and it's already here, and it's making a big change. Most people don't even realize how much, but I just think AI, honestly, because it keeps expanding. And so it's a buzzword. So, a lot of people are like, oh, but no. I mean, it's changing everything. It's shifting how we relate to each other in some positive and very negative ways. It's shifting our buying behaviors. It's shifting home buying. It's shifting how we manage our finances, security. I mean, it's touching every single part of our lives in ways that we don't even understand. And so I think it's going to continue to be kind of like that shadow force that drives us in some very positive and negative ways.
So what are some of the, I totally agree with you. And I helped build an AI company many years ago, and then am now an advisor for one that builds much more narrow apps. The first one we were trying to literally take over the whole, not take over, but boil the ocean. We wanted to be the big solution. We thought we had it all sorted out. But this company is more practical, if you will, pragmatic about building really narrow AI apps. But it has it's not about the application, right? It's not first it's the strategic side of it, then there's the application piece of it and all the ethics and the data strategy that go into that. But there's also the transformative impact that it has on organizations when they start to deploy this kind of technology. It's really different than the sort of plug and play software of the past. So as you are talking to folks about it, what is your orientation? And again, we'll specifically talk about AI, not so much around all the technologies that it also is connected to, like robotics and like blockchain and, bioengineering and all the things that are part of, again, this big innovation ecosystem / wave that is hitting. But specifically when we talk about AI for a moment, where do you think people's biggest misunderstandings are, or where is it that light goes on for them when you start to talk about this?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and I think this comes up because I talk about social issues can come up when you're talking about sales because it's about relationships, right? And so sometimes I'll tread into areas other people wouldn't, but I just have a way of doing it that makes everyone comfortable. And so I'll give you an example. I was very recently speaking to a conference of recruiters for the healthcare industry. And we kind of did a deep dive into AI, and people are like, well, what about, bias in AI and how it's causing all these problems in hiring and this and that. And these are all legitimate issues, right? I mean, it can actually, block people out of a lot of opportunities, not just in terms of occupational opportunities, but in terms of business contracts. I mean, there's so many ways where, you look at, I can't think of the name of it right now, the system, the AI system that, it's on the tip of my tongue, that actually, it looks at recidivism of people who have been arrested. Like the name of it's on the tip.
I don't know, but I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
It begins with a C. But it gives false positives, like a very large amount of false positives to people that are Black versus men or white men. And then what was even more interesting is it gave a large percentage of false positives to women over men, which is really bizarre because women commit less crime. So the misconception is that I think that sometimes what happens, especially if you're a member of a target group, is you think that there's people sitting around saying, how can we, and I don't think that's what happens. It's all about agile development. Whenever we create technology, the first version is going to be flawed. The second version is going to be flawed. And it's going to be flawed based on our own, we can say biases, but you're limited to the experience of the programmer and the team putting it together, right? And so depending on who's involved, you may not have the experience, the outside knowledge level, the different perspectives to account for different things, right? And so then that leads into what they're creating. It doesn't mean that it's inherently bad. It means that we have to invent things with the understanding we're going to have to continuously tweak it to make it better, because we're going to keep finding flaws. And I think people that work in technology have an understanding of that. I think people who don't work in technology oftentimes really think that there's some master plan somewhere with all of these companies that are in no way connected to hurt certain groups of people. Now that doesn't lessen the impact or the importance of getting it right. But I think we do have to understand that inherently technology is going to be flawed, and we're going to have to continuously correct and shift it and shift it as society shifts, because something might work according to what is socially acceptable today, but that might not be socially acceptable, 2 years from now, even.
True, but I think that part of that then is like, so I spend a lot of time in this world thinking about how do we build it responsibly so that we don't look back in 2 years. Like I remember giving a talk to a group of people once we were talking about what was going on. It was way before all this stuff with Facebook, even now. I think it was probably during the Cambridge Analytica piece. And she's like, I'm just sick of the whoopsies. I'm like, we haven't even begun to see the whoopsies yet. But you don't want the whoopsie to be so hard that you can't clean it up. Right, which is where we are in some respect on some things now. What I think has been really fascinating around facial recognition in particular, Joy, whose last name I can never pronounce, but you know her name better than I do, I'm sure, has been such a champion and advocate and evangelist for safe deployment of artificial intelligence and responsible use of facial recognition, if at all. And because it is so difficult to do safely, a lot of companies have withdrawn. So IBM has decided not to do it, right? Many others and cities have chosen not to do it. It's easier to decide not to do it when you don't have a business model around it yet. This is my thesis right now. The reason people are willing to walk away from this, they haven't figured out how to deploy it yet. So they're like, okay, cool, we don't need to really do it. Once you are so embedded with the business model, it's really hard to go in and say now that we need to fix this so dramatically, right? So for me, there's a really a window right now that's quite urgent to have these conversations before we get so attached to a business model or an application that it's too hard to unwind.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I would agree with you on that. I think it's a matter of, again, I'm not saying anyone should shirk their responsibility or say, oh, well, this is just it doing it, we'll fix it. That's not what I'm not saying don't be responsible. But even with the best of intentions, there's going to be some tweaks that have to be made. And so, I think, like you said, we do need to create responsibly. But then at the same time, I think allow a certain amount of grace. But then with haste, we need to plan fixes, right? So we can't just, it'll be all right. We'll just wait until next year. Well, no, if it's having a negative impact on people going to jail, you can't wait.
No, totally. I mean, it's significant. And I totally agree with that. And those are the people who probably are even less, resourced to be able to go for a fight for the fairness of that. What I do think, it's a tricky thing, right? Do you spend time on Facebook? Like, are you a big Facebook?
Yes.
So I have not. I've decided to walk away from Facebook because I feel like I really don't trust the intention with which just as they built, right? They were able to tweak that algorithm during the elections to bring down some of the hostility or the engagement that was engendered because people got all like riled up. And then once they saw that their numbers were shifting, they went back to bringing that algorithm back. So I do think there's a little bit of this that does exist inside.
Well, I think that there's this, but it's not for negative social reasons. It's for positive revenue reasons.
Fair enough. Really big distinction.
Right. And I want to be fair, not that either one is extremely laudable, by the way, but rather than saying, I'm going to do this, which will hurt this group of people because I want to hurt this group of people. You know what? If I post this type of content, we get these many more eyes. Advertisers pay this much more money. Look how much money we're making for our shareholders. And what's interesting is we have this society in the United States, and it's outside of the United States, but this is where I live, so I'm going to focus on that if it's okay, where we are very much, we kind of have this relationship of entrapment, and just most of us are part of the problem, right, on some level. So we might complain about some of these tech companies, but if we were to look into our retirement accounts, we're also shareholders with these companies, right? So it's this weird relationship that we have with these brands. And so in some ways, the harm that they're doing that we don't like socially is benefiting us financially too. And so it's just, I don't know, it's a very interesting situation.
Okay, well, there's other thing we can be responsible all the way around. So first of all, I was laughing that if we ever turn this into a podcast, people won't know what we just did with our fingers, which was like the mad scientist thing just now. So for those who are listening versus seeing, this is what Crystal and I are doing. But I do think that there is, I think that what that makes it's just systemic, right? There's lots of different places where if I want to be an ethical user, investor, builder, right? Because we're also seeing talent go, wait a second, what did I just sign up for here? And this is actually where I want my talent to be deployed. So it goes across all of these places. We have to decide if we want to be congruent with what we think is safe and not safe. And I will say in my criticism of Facebook, I have significant amounts, but I also will hold advertisers responsible, right? Because Facebook wouldn't do that if advertisers didn't jump in and say, we're totally good with it.
So, and I totally agree with that. And so I think, as we move forward, and this is kind of, it's a very foresight way of looking at things, we all influence the future. And so rather than pointing at someone saying, oh, you're bad, which that means or organization or individual can definitely be problematic, right? But sometimes we have to look and see what actions we actually need to take, which could include, divesting. It could include boycotting. It could include becoming a part of a watchdog group. It could include joining the organization to change from the inside. There's so many things we can do to influence change, but we as individuals, if we're really passionate about something, we have to take ownership of it.
I tell you, so back to the diversity, or back to, I just gave you my answer, which is how do we fix some of the bias that is not designed to be evil, but that does crop up because of our blind spots. For me, bringing more diverse teams. And in all ways, right? Yes. So gender becomes a big portion of that. Ethnicity and race becomes a part of that. Age becomes a part of that. We're part of the country. I'm part of what my background was, right? Is that like, what do you help? I should say preach, but how do you help organizations understand how they can navigate that more effectively?
Well, and literally what you just said is what I told the recruiters and healthcare group last week, where I said, you need more diverse teams. And by diverse race, I went into all those different factors. Because here's the other thing, especially when you're talking about creating technology, what many of us don't understand is that we are very much limited by our experiences, but in a very literal way, we're even limited in how we think by our language. Anyone that knows multiple languages and that's fluent knows that there's things you can say in some languages that you cannot say in others. It does not translate. And that a lot of times the values of a culture are embedded in its language. So for instance, there's some concepts we have in English that if you were to go into, some other cultures, maybe some more indigenous cultures, they don't have language. And I'm not talking about technology, because something so taboo, it wouldn't happen, right? So when you have people with diverse backgrounds on a team, it really influences your thinking, because it gets you outside of, and I hate to say this, outside of the box, one way of thinking, because now you have people who have been trained to think differently through their culture and language, who can see blind spots. So, when I think about diversity, especially in technology, but anywhere, it's not about inviting the outcast to the cool kid table, which I think is how sometimes it's presented. Feel good about yourself by inviting the outcast to your table. No, that's ridiculous. It actually protects the organization, because now you have more ideas out there that are more likely to contribute to your longevity and to keep you from being sued, because they're going to see things that your team, if they're all very similar, won't see. And in terms of technology, it allows you to build out things in a completely different way, because you're not dealing with the same limitations you have when everyone has the same cultural reference.
So I'm going to ask a sensitive question. You can decide if you want to go in this direction with me or not. But I've been preaching the same thing for years, right? And I completely agree. But I am now really surprised by and taken aback by the backlash against DEI initiatives, right? And not DEIJ initiatives. and I'm trying to figure out like what's happening here and what advice. I don't know what your perspective is, your feelings. I'm sure it's very personal, but I'm trying, like, if we're seeing it in our school board, we're seeing it inside base camp, we're seeing it inside these really
base camp was a whole situation.
Right.
So I'll answer the question as someone who is not an expert at DEI. I just want to be very, very clear, because even sometimes I get customers or clients that are like, "Oh my gosh, we love you. Now we need someone to speak on DEI," and I'm like, "That's great. Let me give you a list of qualified people."
Right, exactly.
And I've even told clients, there are white men who are more qualified to speak about this than I am. Right?
Fair enough.
Study this. I can speak only from personal experience, right, which only tells you a piece. But I will answer this from personal experience because that's the only way I'm qualified to answer this. So anyone that's with us right now, I hope they understand this. So I have been Black my entire life, okay? I was born in the United States. I really don't know too many African Americans, and I'm being very specific when I say African American, meaning people that have descended from people who were enslaved by some terrorists that lived here, from domestic terrorists. But if you study history, and I'm someone who is a true lover of history, I've traced my own family history to some of my family members settled Louisiana in 18. Okay, so I've really looked into this. If you study history in this country, then none of what's happening right now should surprise you. Because any time in this country where there has been any type of progress based on race or based on culture or based on gender, there's always a backlash. That's very much standard. You look right after slavery was abolished here, and you had all of these African Americans who were in all these prominent positions in government, and you actually had them being strung up and hung and run out and homes burnt down, and so it pretty much killed that whole movement. So this is very standard. I think what happens though is that as humans we like to think that, that's so long ago and we're over that. The problem is that I have aunts that are alive today that teach martial arts and I'm saying this because these are active people that teach black belt martial arts who remember segregation and having to sit in the back of a bus. If my aunts and uncles are still alive telling all these stories, or I remember one uncle was telling a story about them in Chicago where there was a black family moving into a neighborhood to desegregate it. And they were just talking about some of not all, not even most, but some white men showing up and shooting guns and throwing rocks at all of them. These aren't elderly members of my family. These are people just running around. So I say all that to say this backlash is to be expected. I think people are scared, and they're scared of losing their unfair advantage because it is people see it as a life or death situation. And I don't think it means one particular group of people are bad. We've seen things play out like this all over the world that aren't based on race. It might be based on family, tribal affiliation, religion. So it's a very human thing. It's unfortunate, but it's very human.
So I feel like that I totally appreciate the grace and the perspective, because I agree with you. When I put a gender lens on it, I can feel the same thing with more sensitivity. Mm-hmm. But even when I think about from a technology perspective, I think part of why I'm doing my work, which is partly speaking, partly writing, partly coaching, partly building, the things I think that need to be on in the future is because I want to reduce that fear, because I think that people are, when they get afraid, they lock down and they're so unable to see the possibilities. And it does feel like there's a really scarce way, right? If I give any of this up, I mean, we even talk about this in incumbent industries where I was just on a call earlier this morning. We were talking about the plant-based protein world, where like the best strategy is like to not allow you to call, a veggie burger a burger. Because if I don't let you call it a burger, then you won't really impact my meat sales, as opposed to recognizing that maybe we should be like catering to the market that really wants an alternative to cow burger, right? And so there's always, so I talk a lot about this when we talk about change, that we do need to be prepared for the backlash. We need to be prepared for the misinformation campaigns. We should be prepared for that. But I think when you talk about it through a business lens, it feels less personal than when you talk about it through an identity lens. And then I think it's harder. And because, again, I mean, we talk about, for race relations, it's over several hundred years. For gender, it's thousands of years.
Oh, thousands. I've actually made that. The interesting thing is, I'm a woman, and I'm African American, right? And I have friends where I say, you know, the only way this could be more interesting is if I was queer and I had a disability, right? So, because you see different lenses of things. And I've made that same argument, whereas, you know, people make comments about, you know, things that maybe the way certain groups of people act who've been repressed over a few hundred years. And I've made that comment. I said, women have been thousands of years. And so, you know, when people talk about gender characteristics, I'm like, you really don't know what a woman's natural state is unencumbered by societal pressures and programming over thousands of years. And this isn't like some, you know, feminist, you know, equality of the Black Power thing. It's just, it's logic, you know.
It's actually, actually, you know, I went to an all-women's college. I sort of backed into it for several reasons, and I was always an egalitarianist, not a feminist, and a humanist, and not a, you know, blah blah blah. And I never understood why we had to have like feminine studies and all this stuff. And now I have to say I am waking up to it more and recognizing more the patterns of this over a long period of time, which is part of why, again, we created this conversation series, because I got frustrated by seeing women, when we talk about innovation, not represented fairly in history, which we can sort of clean up.
Right.
Not having systemic support for where we are now. So we should actually talk in a moment about what we think is happening when we talk about technology and where women are and our ability to really impact that. But also in the being able to benefit and shape the future. When you see who's being invested in, who's creating the value, who is impacting those algorithms that we just described, and deciding what the use cases for these things are, it is so disproportionately not, you know, for women. And what's concerning for me is that it's slipping. So when you think about comp sci graduates continue to go. And so when you start to put your lens on as a futurist and a technologist and an optimist and a person who represents, you know, the background that you have, do you have a sense of, there's a racial question, but there's a gender question. How do we get more women in technology to be part of this? What do you think the problem is?
The problem of why there's not more women? Is that what you're question?
It's a giant question, and I don't know that even I have a clear answer to it, but if you had to think about it, like, how do we get more women in, or what do you think the hurdle is?
I think the hurdle is social programming. You know, even to this day, you know, I watch how people talk to little girls and calling them bossy. And what I'm saying right now is not a revelation to anyone that's hearing this right now, but I make it my personal mission to interrupt that. And there's ways you can do it so that you don't turn the parent off, or, you know, or whoever's speaking to the child. But it's my mission to really kind of interrupt that. So I think it's part of what we give little girls. I'll give you an example. I have little nieces and nephews. And so I have one little niece that, you know, when she turned 2, you know, in my family, a lot of times you get like little cooking sets and stuff like that. And so, and then I found a really cute little cooking set. And then I bought her a really cool tool set too, right? And so she got both of them. So she got the tools, she got this. And so I make sure to kind of balance out. But at the same token, my nephews, they get cooking sets too. So I'm that aunt that kind of does, because I do think as humans, we need to have a more holistic approach to life, right? We all need certain skill sets, and whether someone chooses to do more of one another in a relationship is irrelevant. We need them. So I think it's all in how we approach it. It's the language that we use with young girls. It's the type of toys we buy them. It's the way we dress them. It's the language we use, the adjectives to describe them. So I don't have the answers. I'm sharing with you what I do in hopes that it'll make an impact.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how we do it, because I agree with all that. And then I also think it's interesting, you know, you look at Toys R Us, or when Toys R Us still existed, toy stores, how they're moving their sort of gendered toy sections, where this is for girls and this is for boys, although we know that, I mean, I know I have 3 children, you see with your nieces and nephews, that there is a certain period where you go through the identity formation stuff, and you want to be in the princess dress, right? And you want to go and lift heavy rocks, or you play with bulldozers or whatever. And I don't think that's wrong either, right? And so we sit here and try and figure out a place for kids to have that. My middle son actually admitted something to me recently. He's turning 21 next week. But when he was in middle school and we had just moved from LA to Austin, he was going through his own kind of like, how do I fit into this world? And seemed more fluid in how he approached things, and people kept calling him it. And he said he loved actually being an it for a while, where he didn't have to kind of conform to anybody else's expectations of what he was supposed to be like. And then he goes through it, and he was really grateful that no one really labeled him even transgender, because he's not, or gay or not. He just got a chance to be Zane, right? He just got to be him for the period of time that he wanted to be him. So there's this interesting space where it is that we get to just acknowledge where people are, where they are. But I think that we're just in a society right now where that gets to be as comfortable and as easy and as temporal. Like it gets to be this here and it gets to be this there and it gets to be there. And so when we start to get to, again, I guess I'm concerned that it's not like we're on this trajectory where only 5% of women were in comp sci. Now it's 15 and we're going to get to 30 and someday it'll be 50. It's going down.
It is.
But there's something, I think, more than just the socialization, because that part's been around forever. And if anything, we're more sensitive to it now than we were in the 50s, 60s. And so what is it that is pulling women out? I wonder the culture inside the industry, right?
I mean, I still think socialization is a big part of it, because here's the other issue. Because I've had this conversation, especially with specific industries, when I end up talking to women. It's rare that I have an all-woman audience, but occasionally I do, and I'm excited. But one of the things that's come up is that through how we're socialized, women still carry an unfair balance of the workload in home life, right? And familial responsibilities. And so we know that that's a huge part of it, because for whatever reason, right, wrong, or whatever, companies perceive someone being present as being more important to the company, as being, as producing more, right? And so if you're having to take time out for pregnancies and to take kids to the doctor, you're perceived as being less effective. And we know this is going to even become a worse problem, because during COVID, more women dropped out of the workforce. We're finding that women are less likely to want to return to work than men in terms of physically being in a building. They like remote work even more. A lot of people like it, but women even more. We're finding even for professional conferences that men have a double-digit increase in wanting to go to physical conferences than women right now. So this is only this is only going to get worse, right, unfortunately. Right. And so I think it's, I can't underscore the socialization enough, because to go deeper, it's not just about whether you wear ruffles or not. It's if you're taught to think a certain way, then you're taking on a greater deal of burden at home. You're less likely to reject a mate beforehand who wants you to do that. You think it's part of the process. And once you accept that labeling, once you accept that extra responsibility, now you've marked yourself in your career. I'm not victim blaming. I'm literally saying that, some women go into life or adulthood accepting a certain level of burden that is going to also hinder them later on, not just emotionally and physically, but even in their careers. So I think that's a piece of it. And then lastly, I think culture is a huge part. We have, you're in technology too, you know this. I'm sure you've seen organizations where it's an old boys club, and maybe those are going away. Now we're having young boys club. They make it sound like there's so much, we've made so much progress, but we haven't, because we still see the numbers and they're lacking. And people pull from people who they're comfortable with and who are like them. And so, I
hear that. I think that what I'm trying to decode a little bit in my world is we've seen that in finance, we've seen that in medical and whatever, but I feel like in some ways those places it's evened out more, right? More women are graduating law school than men are, and more women are in the healthcare profession. And we've sort of cracked the code in so many other domains, but for some reason technology, which is literally the thing that's going to be designing and driving our future, we have not made that progress. And I have found in my career that the place where it was most sexist was when I went to technology, when I started working for that AI company, or when I started doing other stuff. Like prior to that, it impacted me, but not in any really dramatic way. It was part of just sort of how you navigate your way through. And it was dramatic when I moved into technology. So I do think that there is something corrosive in this that we need to sort out and root out and get better. And so maybe it's the young boys perspective, and maybe that's where the socialization is, right? And
I think part of it, I think one way to change it, I don't have the answers, but here's one answer, is for users to hold these companies responsible. So when it comes time for you to make decisions between, different technologies, looking at the board, looking, what kind of record they have. And I know for me, I'm someone who I spend my money very responsibly, and people that know me well, or even sometimes even my business connections that are connecting me on different social networks, they get a kick out of the fact that I hold corporate grudges. The same way that if your neighbor did something terrible to slight you, like they cut down your favorite tree that's in your yard, there's companies I have not bought from. I'm not going to name any, but there's companies I haven't bought from years over one thing they did that I felt was so gross. I'm still holding on to it, right? There's a home goods company. I'm never walking in there again because they did something that was very anti-Muslim. I'm not Muslim, but that was I just can't in good conscience shop with them. So I think, there might be people right now that are reevaluating if they want a relationship with Basecamp.
Right. Well, I definitely found that my issue that way with Facebook and Instagram and the rest. So then it just takes us full circle, though, for a second, and then I'll just take it back to your social media roots a bit and just say, is that the role? Like, I guess the question when we talk about relationships and the fact that these media give us the opportunity to go build them in an authentic way. Do we think that people have done a really good job with that in the past, or do we think that they're shifting? Like when you look at the horizon, Crystal, where is it that you really think we need to be spending a little bit more time and attention in building trust with one another and correcting for a mistake that allows you to get over your grudge? Like, how does that happen?
You have to excuse me, I'm not quite understanding your question. I've heard it.
I guess what I'm saying is when you think about the role that social media plays, and I guess what I'm thinking is, yes, these companies, I'm like trying to figure out my own question. I do think that corporations have done things. When you look at it from an environmental standard, when you look at it from how I treat my workers and my talent perspective, when we think about the diversity of the board, there's a million ways we can assess a company or organization as to whether or not we think that they're really stewarding their resources and the responsibility as effectively as possible. But then we see them trying to make efforts as they become more aware of, or there's more backlash or more understanding. And so how would they win you back? How would they build trust to win you back?
I think transparency. And I don't think that companies can get away from social responsibility. In the past, there was kind of like this separation between church and state. And it was just, you don't talk about politics or you don't talk about these social issues. Focus on the product being good. It's not good enough anymore. Because even if you're starting at a net zero, meaning that you haven't done anything bad, if another company that is your competitor that's doing amazingly socially responsible things going on, I'm going to buy with them. I'm going to become their client. I'm going to become their customer. And so I do think that, we actually have the ability in a capitalistic society to drive business. And the great thing about social media, definitely has a lot of flaws. Okay. I'm not one to not point those out. But, one of the things people complain about now is woke or cancel culture, right? Which is hilarious because these are terms that were stolen from African Americans that were really using it on Twitter, Black Twitter, and they're misappropriating it. But we'll leave that alone for now. What we have, though, is I don't believe that cancel culture exists. I believe we have accountability culture because people were always able to be canceled historically. It's just that you had powerful people, wealthy people, certain groups of people that could blacklist individuals, other companies, could block them out of getting contracts by, having a conversation with someone while they're smoking a cigar in the back room. Well, now the everyday person can get together with other people and say, nope, this isn't working anymore, and push forward a hashtag. And so people are upset because they're losing privilege and because they're being held accountable. And that's not to say that, these networks that people can't be bullies. That's true. People can certainly go left, but the beautiful thing about this is that everyday people, one person, can start a movement to hold an organization accountable and shift the way they do business with enough determination. And of course, they'd have to build on with other people. But one person can light that spark. That's pretty amazing.
It goes both directions, though. So that's something that's interesting. You talked about for good or for bad, because I think that, again, the algorithmic, wave that takes that and provides the information that makes me feel like I want to affiliate with that, whether it's Greta Thunberg on one end or whether it's QAnon on the other end, right? And I am making those two things separate because in my opinion, they're two ends of the spectrum, but maybe somebody else would look at the spectrum slightly differently. That's what we talk a lot about. There's New Power. Did you ever read that book, New Power?
No.
Oh my gosh, that would be a great book for you. Back in the work, it was Henry Timms and Jeremy. It's great because it just talks about the shift in power in terms of when it becomes more distributed, right? And all of us have. I mean, Robinhood versus or the GameStop versus the traditional stock market is sort of a bit of that. Is that you have this ability to pull people into a different way of organizing and coordinating and being able to affect something. And so I guess my wish would be, and this is what goes back to, I guess, the end where artificial intelligence and others will allow us to make better informed decisions and hopefully now become so skewed by misinformation. Now when you start talking about deep fakes or synthetic media, there's a whole another wave of how we're going to have to come to digital literacy around this. And
it used to be people would talk about, you have to believe things you see with your own eyes. But, when you look at deep fakes, and that's going to go away.
Trust the science. When someone can fabricate a science paper, or even a science talk, by someone who looks credible. And so the only thing, so I don't know what gives you hope in there. The way that I'm able to sleep at night is when I go back to history and I go back to Hamilton and Jefferson, and they used to try and call each other out with pamphlets that were written anonymously. And at some point, people started to realize what was real and what wasn't real, or where the bias was in that, and they created their own literacy once they realized that you could just print anything you wanted. Do you think that we'll get there? Like, what gives you confidence that we're going to, as humans, work our way through this complexity, Crystal?
I don't even know if I have confidence that we'll work our way through this.
Okay, that was my bias. I was just assuming.
Well, because it's funny, you said something earlier, and I guess it ties into that, because you said as an optimist, I'm actually a realist, for sure. So I'm the person that whatever I'm given, I believe in making the best of that. Does that make sense? So I'm not.
Yeah. Okay. So that, because I do get a positive energy from you.
Yeah. But I believe in making the best out of what we have, but I'm not necessarily, I can look at something pretty bad and say, all right, this is what we have to work with. So I don't know that I'm confident that we will make it through. But what keeps me going is I believe we all have a responsibility to leave this world better than we came into it. Otherwise, we have no purpose in existing. And for thousands of years, we've done that. Actually, thousands of years, but we've done that. And really part of what keeps me going is my own heritage. Again, because I'm so, I know the name of different ancestors and their stories and things. And I'm able to connect with that because I think, oh my gosh, if they overcame this, and I have a very strange family history in that some of them actually didn't come up through slavery. They were battling being free, wealthy Black people in a country that they weren't supposed to exist in. And so their stories were really wild and strange. But I say all that to say, I believe humans, when our backs are against the wall, we want to live. We want to make a way for our children. And so I do think things might get worse before they get better in a lot of different respects. But once it becomes necessary, whatever that looks like necessary, we'll do what we have to do. So I just keep trying to encourage people and finding ways that they can use technology to make their lives better, to have a positive impact on their communities, to hold their governments and companies responsible for, because governments are us. It's not this separate entity. We are that. These companies that are publicly traded, they are us. They're not this separate entity. And so for me, it's just about empowering people and hoping they use it to the best of their ability. And that's all I have. I have no judgment. I have no hope that something will end up a certain way. I just believe we're supposed to do our best.
I think that is a beautiful way. Now, we can end it there, or I can give you an opportunity to say the key message that you are giving in your talks these days, or the thing that you think that you want to make sure that people really get a sense of what your message is. Is there something that you would want to make sure people get it from the work that you do?
Oh, there's a few key messages, but I'd say for anyone that's listening to us now, a message that might connect with what we're talking about right now is that the technology we're seeing right now, if used strategically, it has the ability to turn you into a superhero, basically with superpowers. We as humans are literally becoming cyborgs. And I want to be very, very clear on what that means. Not an android, which is a robot that mimics a human. I mean, I know you know this, Nancy. I'm saying this for anyone listening.
Yeah. Good.
But cyborgs, which are humans that have robotic or technology attachments that gives them more abilities. And so we have the ability to reach out and touch people across the world. We have the ability to be present for people and basically multiply ourselves to be of assistance to people. It's all about how we leverage the technology, though. We have a choice now that we can use it or we can let it use us. And so I just want to encourage everybody to take ownership of the fact that you're driving this car and you can do it. And it's just about reevaluating the technology you're using to make you a better person, not a perfect person, but a better person that impacts others for positive reasons.
I love that. Couldn't agree more. I'm 100% in your camp, and I'm so excited we get to share you and your work with whoever it is that tunes in to this. And I'm glad I got to know you, Crystal. I look forward to following your work more, and hopefully we'll find a way to collaborate on something together and be on places where we can share this, because I do think this is the work right now, is to help people understand the responsibility of the moment that we're in, and to bring hope to that as opposed to fear to that. Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you.